Welcome, fabulous RLA teachers. The STAAR interim testing has been completed. Thank you all for your efforts on getting this task accomplished. So now what? Well, we see what the results reveal to us. Remember that the interims are intended to measure a student's understanding of a broad band of SEs or student expectations. Because of the nature of the assessments, I broke up the data dialogue webinar into two parts. Today, we will do part one. Part one will target the section that all students took, and part two will target the low track. You'll get a better idea as to exactly what that means when we get into this webinar. Let's get started. So let's get ready for a day of learning. You will need a copy of the data dialogue booklet pictured here, pen or pencil, and highlighter. Sticky notes are optional. I love sticky notes and I will find any reason to use them. Before reviewing the results, let's take a quick look at the basics regarding the assessment. The interim assessments for mathematics, reading, algebra 1, English 1, and English 2 are multi-stage adaptive test forms. Multi-stage tests begin with a section that is the same for all students. This section is called Section 1. After completing Section 1, students are routed to an appropriate Section 2 test that is either low, medium, or high in difficulty based on their performance in Section 1. It is important to remember that multi-stage tests for interims are on grade level. The benefits of multi-stage tests is that they provide the same level of accuracy on a linear test, but with fewer questions. The STAAR interim blueprint or the reporting categories are titled just like STAAR. We have reporting category 1, understanding across genres, reporting category 2, understanding analysis of literary texts, and reporting category 3, analysis and understanding of informational text. Just like with STAAR, the STAAR interim has a set number of questions as well. So reporting category 1 has 5, reporting category 2 has 12, and reporting category 3 has 11. And it's a grand total of 28 questions. I wanted to point out that the actual STAAR for 6th grade has 40 questions. And remember that the interim has 28. Next, I want to provide you with some broad details as to what was tested on each reporting category. Reporting category 1 contained the vocabulary questions. Reporting category 2 contained the fiction passages or literary. And reporting category 3, and in this case only tested informational for reporting category 3. So now let's take a look at those additional details regarding the actual assessment. So all students were given the same 14 questions. So questions 1 through 14, all students took. The first 6 questions, questions 1 through 6, were based on a fiction piece titled On the Air. Questions 7 through 14 were an informational piece titled Darjeeling Tea, the King of Teas. So after they took the first 14 questions, they were directed into a low, medium, or high route. The majority of our students did go into the low route. So let me show you what was on there. So if students were routed into low, they got another fiction piece that would be for questions 15 through 23, and the title of the selection was Half Moon Beach. Thereafter, questions 24 through 28 were from an informational piece titled Biblioburo. If, however, after the first 14 questions, students were routed into a medium route, this is what they got. For questions 15 through 21, they got a fiction piece titled Apgar and Birdball's First Meeting, and then they got an informational piece for questions 23 to 28 titled Photographing a Llama Salt Caravan. Or some students may have been routed into the high. If they were routed into the high, they got another fiction piece, questions 15 through 22, from A Crooked Kind of Perfect, they got an informational piece as well for questions 23 through 28, and the title of that piece was The American Gray Wolf, Friend or Foe. Please know, ladies and gentlemen, that at any point during the webinar, you are free to hit the pause button and then resume when you are ready. So now what we're going to do, now that we know the basics of the test, we're going to be moving into how students performed. And again, be reminded that we are only looking now for today, we are looking at those first 14 questions only. The data analysis process will be the same. The here's what, so what, and now what. We've used this one before. You may remember this one from our 4 and 9 weeks assessments for the data analysis. What will be different this time is that for the sake of time, I will be providing you with the key findings or the facts regarding the data. I'll be providing you with a here's what. Particularly because the data among campuses is very similar in nature. So your work as an RLA team will be to discuss the so what and now what. So once again, I will be providing you with the facts, with the here's what. That way you can move into the so what and now what. So here we go, ladies and gentlemen. So be ready to take some notes. You might consider writing a little bit smaller so that you can fit all the notes into this one column. It's up to you though, just a recommendation there. So this is our first set of data, overall performance by reporting category by campus. Please note that this is a summative of how students performed for all the questions they took. So it includes data for all students and for the tracks, low, medium, or high. Just as a reminder, in case you may not know what is R1, R2, and what is R3 on this report, RC1 includes all the data for vocabulary. R2 contains the data for fiction. R3 includes the data for informational text. So let me repeat if you want to write this down. R1, you're looking at your vocabulary. R2, you're looking at your fiction or literary texts. R3 is your informational text. So remember, I'm going to skip into here's what. So have your handout ready. So get ready to write down some of the facts based from here. First, students performed better in reporting category 1. Second, between fiction and informational text, students performed better in fiction. And in some cases, the difference between the two, and that is between fiction and informational text, is between 7 to 8 percentage points. Third, in regards to special populations, the gaps between overall and special population performance varies anywhere from 5 to 15 points between overall performance and special pop performance. It is also important to note that for the most part, special education students perform lower than EL students. And remember that you're free to stop the webinar if you need to, or you need to rewind to write down some of these things again, ladies and gentlemen. You're also free to stop the webinar to add any other thing that you notice, especially those that may be specific to your campus. Again, if need be, either rewind, replay, or pause and stop and discuss, and that is up to you all as a team. If you decide to pause, then you can resume when you are ready. So that was a reporting category data. Next, we will be moving into how students perform by SE, or the student expectation. Remember that all students completed questions 1 through 14, and that's what we're focusing on now. Just a reminder, the fiction piece was questions 1 through 6 on the air. Question 7 through 14 was the informational, the Darjeeling tea, the king of teas. So now let's take a look at those SEs and what the outcome was. And we're looking specifically for the SEs for questions 1 through 14. So we're going to look at the performance by student expectation, or SC. At the top or here is the district data. Let me explain what is on this report though. When I ran the report on Eduphoria, I was given all the SCs that were tested in each of the sections. All students, low route, medium route, and high route. So you will see all the SCs across the top. Those were all the SCs that were for either all, low, medium, or high. Underneath the SC, you will see the question numbers. So question 7 was 2A. Question 2B were questions 1 and 8. 5F was questions 2, 6, and 10. 5H was questions 9, 11, 12, and 14. 6C was question 13. And finally, 7C was questions 3, 4, and 5. On this page, you will also see the performance by campus on questions 1 through 14 by SE. So don't be distracted by everything else. Right now, all we are looking at is those that are in yellow that you see here. Because of the 14 questions, you'll see the 14 questions here. You will also notice that not all SCs were tested, and that's because they appeared elsewhere. So right now, just focus on what you see highlighted here in yellow. You may refer to your at-a-glance document because I know the numbers don't mean anything. It's like, what is 2C? What is 6D? So you may refer to your at-a-glance document if you like. So what are the facts for this data piece? Let's take a look at that. So here's what regarding this data piece. So have your data protocol handout ready. Get ready to write down some facts. So here's a fact. Here's what. Students performed in the 40s in the highly tested SCs. And the highly tested again was 5F with 3 questions, 5H with 4 questions, and 7C with 3 questions. So once again, students performed in the 40s for the highly tested SCs. Also note that in those same SCs, special populations performed in the 30s. In regards to 2A and 2B, again, 2A and 2B are our vocabulary SCs. Students performed in the 50s, while our special populations performed in the mid-30s and upper 40s. So notice those gaps, ladies and gentlemen, whether it was in those highly tested or in those vocabulary. At this time, you may choose to rewind if I went a little bit too fast for you, and replay so you can write down those facts. And remember that you can stop the webinar at any time and you can add your own facts specifically for your campus. And then you can resume when you are ready. Now, let's take a look at the selections and the questions. So we're going to look specifically for the questions for only the SCs that were highly tested on the assessment. So we're going to look at the questions for 5F, 5H, and 7C. Please know that the test is not available for download on the reporting site. So what you will see is the cut and paste version of the test. I took snapshots and then added them to this PowerPoint. Students did not see it this way. So it's very important for you to note that students did not see it this way. Rather, they saw it on the testing format on the actual testing site. I apologize, ladies and gentlemen, for the size of the font and also for those questions that may seem a bit blurry. This is the fiction selection students saw on the assessment. It's titled On the Air. By merely looking at the title and picture as experienced readers, we can tell that the selection is about radio or podcast or something along those lines. The selection is, in fact, about a middle school student, Melissa, who won a guest spot on a radio show after she won an essay contest. It details what happened the day she went on the show. If you haven't done so already, please take some time now to quickly read the selection. Remember, you can pause the webinar if you'd like. Next is the informational selection. By looking at the title and subtitles as experienced readers, we can tell that the selection will be about tea. specifically about Darjeeling tea. This selection is what makes the Darjeeling tea the king of teas. I want to point out, though, that this is what we would consider a multimodal selection. This actually, ladies and gentlemen, is a new SC for us, a multimodal. Multimodal, as defined by the TEKS resource system, is the strategic integration of two or more modes of communication to create meaning, include written and spoken text, images, gestures, music, digital text and media, and live performances. This selection, if you notice, has all the characteristics of an informational selection, including the text features, but then on the second page, readers will see a literary nonfiction of sorts. In addition, notice that one of the sections, T processing, has subsections, which are in italics. Again, this is something that we had not seen before, so we had that multimodal, and then we had those sections within that section. As good readers, we can tell that process relates to some kind of steps, so what is in italics within that subsection will more than likely be the steps to T processing, so we can refer to that as procedural. Let's look at the rest of the selection. This section, which is the last part of the selection, is titled Mina of the Mountains. Here is where you will see a shift. This is more of a literary nonfiction piece. It is told in the first person point of view, but it is still on the same topic of the overall selection. That is what makes it multimodal. We have the informational, and then it's combined with a literary nonfiction. We will not start looking at the data for the three highly tested SCs, 5F, 5H, and 7C. We will be looking specifically now at those questions, so be ready to take some notes. We will start by looking at the 5F questions. 5F, in fact, is a readiness standard. Remember that a readiness standard has a 60 to 70% chance of being assessed. Two of the questions, 2 and 6, were from the literary text. Those are the ones you see here. You may recall this process from our data dialogue webinars. The answer is boxed in, and the numbers you see are the percentages of how students responded. So, for example, for question 2, the answer was B, and 66% of the students in the district, this is district data, got the correct answer, and 13% of students also were distracted by A. When looking at question 6, 53% got the answer right, but then we see 20% were distracted by A. I am in fact using district data. Remember that students across the district perform very similarly, but if you'd like, you can look at your own campus data. I would be happy to run those reports for you. Just reach out to me. Students performed fairly on question 2. They were almost there. They were at 66%, but question 6 proved to be more challenging. So that is the one that we will look at. Question 6 reads, with which statement about broadcasting live on the radio would Melissa and Helen most likely agree? 53% of students chose the correct answer, which is C, speaking live on the radio takes confidence and practice. But 20% of students were distracted by choice A. Anyone can work in radio if given a chance. Although choice A can be true, ladies and gentlemen, it does not connect back to what the question is asking. The key word here is broadcasting live. So here's what. Students chose a response that is related to the selection, but not the response that answers the question. Now let's take a look at question 10. Question 10 was based on the informational text, the selection about Darjeeling tea. The question reads, which sentence best supports the idea that tea grown in Darjeeling is one of a kind? Students, as you can tell on this one, they were all over the place. 27% chose C, which is the correct answer, and 39% chose B, and 19% chose A, and 16% chose D. So here's what. Students selected responses, ladies and gentlemen, that were inaccurate. Had students gone back to double check the answer choices, they would have noted that the answers were inaccurate as per the reading selection. I want you to note the difference in performance from literary to informational. Students experienced more success on the literary piece on the inferencing questions on literary versus the informational inference question. To further look at the questions and answer choices, feel free to stop the webinar at this time and resume when you are ready. The choice is yours. Let's move on to the questions now for 5H. Let's take a look at the 5H questions. 5H is synthesize information to create a new understanding. Notice that this one is also a readiness standards, and I know I sound like a broken record, but a readiness standard has a 60 to 70% chance of being assessed. Questions 9, 11, 12, and 14 are all asked from the informational passage. 9 and 11 are shown here, and 12 and 14 will be on the next slide. Please know that STAAR only tests 5H on informational passages. So you might want to take a note of that. STAAR only tests 5H on informational passages. So that's very important to note. Testing 5H in informational text makes a lot of sense in that when it comes to informational text, after we read the informational text, we create new understanding about the topic. So let's start with the data for questions 9 and 11. Question 9 reads, which statement is supported by paragraphs 8 through 11? The answer is D. Withering and drying are similar because both remove moisture from the leaves. 40% of students chose the correct answer. 21% were distracted by C and 20% by A, and closely behind is B with 18%. A, B, and C were in fact neck and neck. Choice A is incorrect because it states that both use workers to sort leaves. That is only partially true because it only applies to drying as per the text. Choice B, that is incorrect because it states that both are using machines on the leaves. That is only partially true because using a machine only applies to rolling, again, as per the text. Choice C is incorrect because it states that rolling and oxidizing are similar because both expose the leaves to clean air. That is only partially true because it only applies to oxidizing. The answer choices in this question required students to compare key ideas within a particular selection. It required students to go back and closely look at the ideas presented and see how they connected to one another. What may apply in this case? So now let's take a look at question 11. What conclusion is supported by information in location, 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 and Mina of the mountains? This question required students to compare and contrast two sections of the selection. The answer was D. Mina and her family have access to childcare on the T estate where Mina's parents and older sister work. 32% of students got the answer correct. 33%, however, were distracted by B. Mina's parents each grew up on Darjeeling mini tea estates. This answer choice is incorrect because it cannot be supported with any evidence from the selection. 23% chose C. Mina's older sister works at harvesting tea only during the busiest time of the harvest, and that is incorrect because it is inaccurate information about Mina's older sister. And 13% chose A. Mina leaves the estate in Darjeeling to go to school is incorrect because Mina going to school only applies to the Mina section of the test. So here's what. Students fell for answers that had partially accurate information or completely inaccurate information. Now let's take a look at questions 12 and 14. Question 12 reads, what does the information in Mina of the mountains help the reader better understand? The correct answer was C, what a day in tea harvesting is like. 20% were distracted by A, which is incorrect because it applies to other sections of the selection, but not the section on Mina. 25% were distracted by B, which is incorrect because it too applies to other sections of the selection, but not the section on MENA. 13% were distracted by D, and also this was incorrect because, like with the other two answer choices, applies to other sections of the selection, but you guessed it, but not on the section on MENA. Let's look at question 14 next. Which idea is best supported by information throughout the selection? The answer is D. The process of growing and harvesting Darjeeling tea involves multi-steps, and 46% of our students chose the correct answer. 25% were distracted by A, which is incorrect because there is no evidence to support that the Himalayan mountains made agricultural product. 16% were distracted by B, and this too is incorrect because there also is no evidence to support that it's the only employment in Darjeeling. Finally, 12% were distracted by C, and this overall is inaccurate information. In summary, on this assessment, when it comes to 6.5H, students were required to compare ideas between sections and/or paragraphs and analyze a particular paragraph or paragraphs for key ideas. So notice, ladies and gentlemen, this is a whole other level of thinking. This is what it comes down to in terms of them having to synthesize information. So here's what for this last part of 5H. Students fell for answers that had partially accurate information or they were completely inaccurate information. Let's move on to the last part, which is 6.7C. 6.7C is analyze plot elements including rise in action, climax, fall in action, resolution, and nonlinear elements such as flashback. A quick note, ladies and gentlemen, about this SC. This one is only applicable to literary texts, such as fiction, literary nonfiction, and drama. And just like the other two, this one too is a readiness standard. 6.7C had 3 questions on this assessment, questions 3, 4, and 5. These questions are all based on the fiction passage On the Air. So let's start with question 3. When Helen and Melissa are inside the soundproof booth, Helen tells Melissa about other DJs because, for this question, we will only look at the 2 choices that students selected. The correct answer was A, and 50% of students chose it. 27% though were distracted by B, but it is incorrect because there is no text evidence to support this answer. There is no evidence to support that she wanted to prepare Melissa for what is about to happen. Let's look at question 4. How does the character Derek contribute to the development of the plot? On this one, ladies, notice the difference between the two. On this one, ladies and gentlemen, students were all over the place on this one. Same as C, different question, different performance. The answer was D, and 37% of students chose it. 29% chose C, which is incorrect because there is no text evidence to support it. There is no evidence of Melissa's desire to compete with other announcers. 22% chose A, which is also incorrect because although Derek tells her about the essay contest, it does not highlight the importance of Melissa writing one. 12% chose B. This one is incorrect because although it may be true that she has several close friends, that's not related to the advancement of the plot. Let's take a look now at the last question, question 5, the question for 6.7C. Question 5 reads, the fact that Melissa had bragged about being the guest DJ causes her to. For question 5, we will only look at 2 choices that students selected. The correct answer was B, and 54% of students chose it. 24% though were distracted by A. This choice is incorrect because it's actually contrary to what happened in the story. Melissa was nervous because she felt lots of people would listen to the program. So here's what. So be ready to write that down. Students were distracted by answer choices that either had no text support or were actually opposite of what had happened. So let's move on to the last piece. We're going to now talk briefly about our next steps. So you now have your notes for here's what. You are now ready to move on to so what and now what. This concludes part 1. Remember, part 1 is all about all students, the first 14 questions. Part 2 is coming soon. Please stop the webinar, and discuss the here's what statements and complete the so what, now what columns as a grade level team. By all means, you all know where to find me, how to find me, text, email, call. I am at your service. Thank you for participating in this webinar, ladies and gentlemen. Have a great one.